started, just wanted to give a quick word about the Episcopal Church Foundation. For those of you who are not familiar with ECF, the Episcopal Church Foundation is a lay-led and run organization that offers financial, leadership, and strategic development for Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and other organizations such as camps and conference centers, charities, and other related Episcopal organizations. We do this through a variety of programs and services, such as ECF Model Practices, which is where you can get vestry papers. We publish the Vestry Resource Guide and Funding Future Ministry. We offer a variety of services with capital campaigns, endowment management services, and plan giving services. And also the education events that we offer, which include in-person events and online webinars, which we offer every quarter, such as this one that you're attending right now. Please check out the ECF website for more information about all of these and for other webinars that are coming up throughout the year. The ECF Fellowship Partners Program is one of the oldest and longest running programs of the Episcopal Church Foundation. Founded in 1964, we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Fellows. ECF has named over 200 scholars and ministry leaders to the fellowship. We are recognizing that these wonderful individuals, being able to support them at critical junctures in their vocation, and being able to support them to share their knowledge and their experience and their best practices with the wider church in very practical ways. And this is one of the such ways that we're able to do this. This is available for both lay and ordained Episcopalians, and we build up a relationship with all of our fellows, not just in the years in which we are helping to fund their work, but also over the long term as well. The 2015 fellowship deadline for applications is coming up very quickly next week on Friday, March 13th, but know that this is offered annually, and I would encourage you to look at the Fellows News or listing of fellows for more information about what they are up to, and if you are feeling called to potentially applying to be an ECF Fellow. Just a few technical notes before we get started. Right now I have everyone on mute, but if we do run into some audio interference, I may have to do that. If you'd like to join us on the webcam, please do so by pressing the Start My Webcam button and then start sharing. Griff will be happy to take questions at any point of this webinar. Please feel free to use the chat box at any time. I will be monitoring this to make sure that Griff is aware of any questions that he may not have seen at any point and make sure that we can get around to answering that. Slides are available now on the left-hand side of your screen under the box marked Files. If you don't have a chance to download them right now, that in the resources sheet, we will be sending out that in an email along with a link to the recording in an email within 1 to 2 days after this. And again, on that note as well, we are recording this. Barring any severe technical issues, we'll have this posted and made public as well. I see that Griff has had to step off real fast, but I will quickly introduce that Griff is a 2013 ECF Fellow. He is a doctoral student in social cultural anthropology at the University of Washington, and also serves as a priest associate at St. David of Wales in Portland, Oregon. His coursework focuses on environmental anthropology, political ecology, environmental justice, social movements, and climate change. Griff's fellowship will support his dissertation research, a multi-sided approach to the lived experience of climate change, and for which we are very excited to have him presenting on this evening. So thank you, Griff.
Thank you, Brendan and Miguel. Let's see, yeah, I wanted to introduce myself as well. As Miguel said, as Brendan said, I'm coming to you from Portland, Oregon, where I'm a priest associate at St. David of Wales Episcopal Church, studying anthropology at the University of Washington. But I grew up in Rhode Island. I see someone here is from Woods Hole. Grew up sailing in Buzzards Bay with my dad. And I've lived all over New England, and I have a strong affinity for the White Mountains of New Hampshire and washed-up Red Sox players who peaked in the 90s. I trust that you all laughed, even though I can't hear you. Before moving in the Pacific Northwest, I lived in San Francisco, where I served as the Environmental Justice Missioner in the Diocese of California, where I met Melissa Ridwan, who's on the session with us today. I want to welcome her. And so I've been wrestling with this interplay between religion and ecology since college. My reflections today are the outcome of the past 5 years of engagement with climate change since the time I was in California, and especially with those spirit-filled movements, social movements around the world now working for climate justice. I'd like to especially thank the Episcopal Church Foundation for their support. It's really a great network, and both Brendan and Miguel and everyone there has been greatly supportive. And thanks for setting this up. So let's begin with this prayer from the prayer book. You can join me, say it if you want, wherever you are, or just listen. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. So I wanted to just begin with an overview of where we're headed for the next hour. First, we'll brainstorm around the question of ministry and climate change to get a sense of where we're at and what's active in the Episcopal Church. Next, I'll introduce the concept of the Anthropocene, which may be familiar to some of you, and I'll ask you to consider what this new period of Earth's history might mean for how we practice ministry faithfully today. And following that, I'll identify those Episcopal Church teachings and resources which move us in, I think, a framework of climate justice. And finally, I'll propose a typology for ministry in this new age, the Anthropocene, that's rooted not only in practices of resilience and restoration, but of resistance as well. So hopefully as we go, we'll have some time for questions and a closing conversation at the end. So I think, Brendan, since we are using the audio, let's just take a few minutes just to hear from folks in terms of what forms of ministry are they actively involved in or going on around them that in some way address global climate change. Just real brief, just a couple of what you've seen and where you are. You could also use the chat box, I guess.
Yeah, if folks would like to put those into the chat box, that would be great.
Oh, okay. Sorry. We've got at least 2 people typing. Multiple attendees are typing. I didn't anticipate the awkward moment before anything comes through the chat box.
Or for those of you who are on the phone who want to unmute yourselves, you're welcome to chime in with that as well.
So what's happening in your parish, deanery, diocese, province, or level of ours combination? It some way has to do with global climate. Okay, LMC reduction of parish carbon footprints, also incipient advocacy ministry. That's the beginning. I'd be interested to know specifically advocacy around what in particular, but reduction of carbon footprint.
Yeah, hi, Griffiths. Can you hear me there? Hello?
Yeah, let me just read a couple of these real quick.
Sure, go ahead.
Kristen Hansen Village from Anchorage. Villages on the Stewart Peninsula of Alaska are affected by changing ice conditions related to changes in climate. These villages are closely related to the Alaskan Lutheran Church in Anchorage, which Kristen is part of the Lutheran Church. Yes, this is a very important issue, and we have Italians just further north in Galena, where I spent time. Lindsay, currently recycling eco-friendly plates, bowls, etc. We got rid of styrofoam, and now either use actual plates or paper and recycle it. Okay, so more sort of Irish greening sustainability work. Sally at St. Asaph's, I'm not wrong, we have a sustainability green team, seminars with outside speakers, installed LED lights, and well-accepted awareness of the faithful stewardship of climate change are inextricably related. So awareness. Deborah, working with diocesan and diocese of Massachusetts, looking at climate change in Germany, Iceland, South Africa, west coast of America, on a Lily grant. Wonderful. This co-chair of the Global Campaigns Commission, California, for the World Mission, and also coordinate Sacred Space in Oakland, which holds church and runs with homeless people in Oakland. Okay, so connecting climate change and hospitality. Was there someone that wants to jump in?
Yeah, Griff, this is Dorsey. You said you'd be interested to know things about the advocacy. I'm from St. Peter's in the San Diego region in California, and we are just starting really an advocacy ministry. We've never had that before. We're just in the process of deciding what are the major issues that we as a congregation want to advocate for. And being as we're located on the West Coast and have a good number of low-lying areas,
Great. I also recommend that you get in touch with my friend Melissa in Diocese of California, Will, also a ECF fellow who is looking for interfaith in California. I think he might be in Northern California, but he'd be wise to come up. He's doing it in California. So thanks for that. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Pretty good spectrum, everything from greening parishes, to global mission work, to local hospitality for unhoused people. Thinking about how to support frontline communities in their own synods. Someone else is typing. Okay. And so I think it's fair to, and we're hearing about a burgeoning advocacy ministry in San Diego. Lindsay, starting a beehive. Of course, agriculture has been, and community gardening and raising bees and chickens and things are in Portland, the sort of backyard capital of the world. Probably not, but where if you've seen Portland. For at least 2 decades of body, and apologies, you're not with the Episcopal Church. I'll be speaking mostly as a we here. I include you, of course, in our body. Body and new forms of ministry, which in some way or another address climate change. Range from environmental ministries focused on education, sustainability, screening, community gardening, and government-focused advocacy. Others have been more directly related. We've heard about global justice and development, companion relations between dioceses, world, economic justice, hospitality, especially for migrant communities, immigration, or direct ourselves and each other, whether our theories of change are adequate to the scale of the situation. I've witnessed a lot of exhaustion and burnout among people working on climate issues over the years in our church. And, especially when people have been working on this and chairing committees for decades, have trouble getting their, brothers and sisters involved. And, some people propose it's because we're overwhelmed, and that's definitely part of it. But I also think it's because we're maybe not asking enough of each other and not asking enough of ourselves. Our theories of change that we are working with are not. We know that it won't get us where we need to go. And so I think we need to develop new theories of change. And then there's the question of whether climate change is inherently political. Working at the individual, household, or even parish scale on stewardship and sustainability is relatively easy, especially in a solidly middle class or upper class parish. Not only does installing an efficient furnace in the Northeast or solar panels in California save money in the long run, it's completely apolitical. It doesn't challenge the deep structural dimensions at the root of the climate crisis. So I think we've really been taking an apolitical approach to what is inherently a political issue. And by politics, I'm not referring to elections, because while there are key differences in the dominant parties, neither of them is offering anything close to where we need to be on climate change. I'm talking about something much more fundamental. I'm talking about the need for an honest debate about what is valued, by whom, and how value itself is measured. Not everybody is going to agree on these things, but real decisions have to be made. And most of these decisions boil down to an incompatibility between ecological well-being and the economic models which dominate our world today. Getting ahead of myself. There are stakes in these political decisions, and we need to be more honest and upfront about them. Before I say more on economy and ecology, I'd like to ask this last question. What is really being denied when we encounter or participate in climate denial? I think we need to take a pastoral approach to this question, asking whether, is it really just the science that's being denied, or is it the implications? Is it the psychological trauma that the science, when we take it seriously, instills in us? Is it the obvious economic implications that's being denied? Is it the way that some groups of people have actually been marginalized by the educated liberal classes in this country, and their needs have not been met, and that science is associated with a particular kind of elite university culture? These are all very serious considerations. So, in bringing up questions of value, we have to talk about, I think we need to reflect on how our society values people and the earth. It's no coincidence that the Anthropocene arose with a particular transformation in globalization of industrial capitalism. And toward that end, some scholars propose that we actually should call this age the Capitalocene. In many of our circles, it may be considered impolite to have this conversation, but it needs to happen. We're happy to object to consumerism because it places the burden on each of us as individuals. But we must also talk about something much deeper: structural inequality and economic exploitation at the systemic level. These are not byproducts, but are necessities of today's capitalist society. Climate change forces us to ask, can capitalism as we know it continue? Now, this topic probably deserves a whole month of webinars, Bible studies, potlucks, and deliberations. But I'm just going to offer 7 unfairly quick questions that can help us begin to think about what our own personal and collective position is within a capitalist society. Do we believe that economic growth and expansion is the greatest good, or do we hear this rhetoric often? And how do we respond to it? Do we work too much? Do we reap a profit from other people's labor? Do we exploit the earth? Does money mediate our daily social interactions or most daily interactions? Does money govern our collective decisions? Do we confuse exchange value, what something is worth and financially, for use value, what it can be, what it actually does in the world, its reality? And do we have a hard time even imagining a different way of doing things? There's a common saying, it is much easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. Why is this? Well, such forms of living together and relating to one another have become naturalized. They appear as totally normal. But they haven't always been this way, and they're not the only ways of organizing our planetary life together. As Christians, we have many different visions of alternatives. Christ's kingdom, or as some ecofeminists have rewritten it, the kingdom of God, K-I-N, kingdom, or the beloved community of Dr. King. These utopian visions may perhaps be the most practical thing today, for they call us to the different future we so desperately need. So if the word capitalism is distracting, let's put it aside for the rest of the talk. I hope you'll chime in at the next opportunity, but for the rest of this session. And except to think in the back of your mind that I consider the proposals that I'll offer in the final section to be a vision of actually a post-capitalist future, and I don't think it's as far off or as impossible as you might. And just the one question I would ask us is, what will the Episcopal Church look like after capitalism? And why not begin being that now? So, one approach to Anthropocene ministry, well, let's see if there's any questions actually. That was sort of anyone have any comments or questions? Go ahead and just type them in live and I'll try and stop. Otherwise, I'll keep going and we'll get to our more open-ended conversation at the end. And one approach that, oh good, Deborah's typing. I'm going to keep going, and when it shows up, let's give it a second here. Good, a couple of folks are typing. Deborah, it's interesting to think about the power of hierarchy of conversation, both within the church, then it cuts off. Yes, this is a deep, both within the, so the question of hierarchy and within the church. Yeah, okay, we'll see what comes through there. Within the church and in response to climate change. That's right. I mean, at one level, we need very large things to change. But can this be done? You know, the hierarchical structures that are there, I'm thinking politically, folks who make decisions are pretty well insulated from the effects of their decisions, and they don't experience what those effects do to sort of ordinary people. Multiple attendees are typing. It is also interesting that our presiding bishop is an oceanographer. Well, let's see. All of these comments are not showing up yet, so I'm going to keep going, and then we'll cache these comments and we'll return to them. But keep typing them in. So, they all came at once. Okay. and there are other scientists in the House of Bishops. Yes, I will be in a second. I'll reference a very powerful letter from the House of Bishops, the Keto pastoral letter, which I think really supports this kind of analysis. Certainly not great is good, but is economic growth a good? If so, what are the ramifications of that reality, particularly for less advantaged groups that might benefit from growth? This is a very key question, and when thank you, Kristen, that's an important question. So this is a debate among people, like economists. Can we have a post-growth economy? And people are also very clear to emphasize that any sort of economic transition, especially an energy transition, needs to be a just transition and to support those workers or other sort of trades that, certain kinds of industry we probably shouldn't be doing anymore. I think the point about overwhelm is central to the issue. Church people trying to give to our support many different causes and issues. If we could move to see these as part of the whole, and I think climate justice may be a good container for that whole, then we can experience our own parts inside that. Yes, thank you, Melissa. This is super important. I don't know, I wasn't really awake, but I guess in the 90s there was sort of this fracturing of politics into all these different issues, and in our church, as different communities carved out space for themselves and different causes, our church ministries have come to resemble that in many ways, and many of those are incredibly important. But there's also a way in which certain would-be allies and supporters that don't end up talking to each other and end up in competition for increasingly scarce resources. So I think we need to move beyond that as best we can. And it isn't a reason why. That's a good segue, Melissa. Thank you. I've been very much taken with climate justice as a framework. I think it's a very powerful framework for ministry in the present. So what is climate justice? Climate justice is a global social movement. It's also a method of analysis emerging from this movement, which applies basic environmental justice principles to our assessment of climate change and what to do about it. It's really quite simple. We might ask, who bears the brunt of negative climate impacts around the world, recognizing that these are unevenly written. The impacts of climate change are disparate. And who is historically responsible? A climate justice approach to climate change begins with these two questions and seeks to address the obvious disparities between those who have built empires by burning fossil fuel and those who endure the first and greatest impacts of climate disruption. Global elites, especially in the United States, the UK, and Europe, have caused climate change. And while the communities of the global south were historically marginalized people in the global north, indigenous people, communities of color, low-income persons, workers, all bear the greatest negative burden. This is a situation of structural evil, and I think it must be addressed by common and collective action directed toward systemic change. So, two resources in the Episcopal Church, which are just fabulous, and I don't have time to really get into them here, but they're in the handout. The first would be the pastoral teachings on from Keto, the Bishop's Keto teaching, which is an unbelievable document, just so powerful, so deeply rooted in the gospel. And then the other is this resolution from General Convention in 2012, Resolution B023, mislabeled as an environmental justice resolution. It should be a climate justice resolution. It calls on Episcopalians to work for climate justice in many of the ways I'll now elaborate. And I think both of these, if you're looking at having these conversations in your parish or in any group you're a part of, I think these documents, just reading them the way you read the Bible, just faithfully, like what does this mean? What do we think about this? These are great study documents, and they're part of our church's the multiplicity of voices that forms what our church holds. So in this last part, I'd like to offer a typology of climate justice ministry. But you could probably organize it differently. This is how I've chosen, or how it's sort of come to me for the last few years. So first we might speak of works of resilience, where we put our vast networks of solidarity and mutual aid to work for the benefit of those frontline communities most affected by climate change or fossil fuel extraction. And I'll unpack each of these in a second. Second, we would be wise to pursue works of restoration, both ecological restoration, but also the restoration of equitable, humane, and healthy economies at scales appropriate to the bioregions we inhabit. And third, because these first two will only bring us so far, and because we are a prophetic people, we must engage in works of resistance. And if you like, this typology corresponds to the two dimensions of historical nonviolent movements for major social transformation. What Gandhi held to be the necessary marriage between a constructive program, symbolized by his spinning wheel, and the obstructive program. And Gandhi had various formulas around how to balance these. But so I think of resilience and restoration as elements of a constructive climate justice ministry, and the resistance piece as a necessary obstructive element in creating climate justice. So resilience. Find your front line. Building resilience. Resilience is the capacity of a socio-ecological system, that is a group of people and their environment, to bounce back from shocks or disruptions. It's a major concept among scholars and practitioners of climate adaptation. Resilience, to bounce back from shocks or disruptions, especially in this case environmental disruptions or the impacts of climate change. For us, it puts the focus on frontline communities, those who are already experiencing the burdens of climate change. And we might respond in such a way such that such communities have, in the words of liberation theologians, a preferential option. We're fortunate to be part of a diverse global communion. The Episcopal Church itself is deeply international, and many of our dioceses and parishes companion relationships either across town or around the world. And if I've been critical at all as to how we as a body have approached climate change up to now, then let me say that I think that these global networks and these companion networks is what makes us probably the strongest. So if you're from a frontline community, you might be emboldened to reach out across our church as you seek to build resilience where you are. If you, like me, have enjoyed the benefits of environmental and other types of privilege, you might begin to build relationships outside of your own community and begin to attempt to understand the interests and desires of others on their own terms. And in this way, we can begin creating networks of hospitality as well, even as some of our brothers and sisters may eventually find themselves displaced by things like sea level rise. So in closing on resilience, our communion gives particular shape to our responsibility. It's global. And as Christians, the interests of a single-stage territory like the United States cannot be the measure of our world. Second, works of restoration or transition. This is the other side of the constructive climate justice ministry, restoring the commons, restoring the earth, and in the process inventing new social relationships. We're talking here about a positive vision for the beloved community to come, a world where we are called by God to create here, a world that we are called by God to create here and now, a more just, healthy, and equitable world for all creatures. Elements of this world might include, in addition to ecological restoration, economic localization and economic democracy or equity, clean energy transition and decentralization. Somehow holding this tension, the flip side of one and the other, this question of growth. There's some interesting resources on the handout about the degrowth movement, and whose jobs might go away and how can work and labor and wealth be distributed more equally, even if there's maybe less work to do in the world. The flip side would be this transition could create a lot of new, different kinds of jobs, green jobs. What are the nonviolent financial mechanisms that are needed to do this in an equitable way? And here's the emphasis I was already anticipated. How do we seek a just transition, especially for workers? So again, this is the good stuff. This is the stuff that we're already beginning to do. It keeps us positive. It's encouraging. But in the Anthropocene, we also will run up against the limits of this kind of work. Unfortunately, when atmospheric chemistry is involved, there's a little bit of math to do. So, as I noted before, we are already committed to about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit warming, or 2 degrees Celsius. And most of the world's scientists and governments agree that anything above this level would be catastrophic. And even this amount that we're already seeing involves many different challenging, difficult impacts for already marginalized or exploited communities around the world, not to mention the cultural and spirit challenges for indigenous communities, especially in the Arctic. So if we're to stay below this threshold, 2 degrees Celsius, the global economy can only emit another 565 gigatons of carbon dioxide. That's it. And yet the fossil fuel industry has in its reserves more than 5 times that amount, even as they search for more. So this analysis, there's a link somewhere over here, in the Bill McKibben article in Rolling Stone, which you can check out. It's a very powerful piece that he wrote. Bill McKibben is a Methodist environmentalist, professor, and founder of 350.org. And this math that he sort of offered, this conclusion that we really can only burn to stay below a catastrophic threshold 1/5 of the known fossil fuel resources. This was recently corroborated in the IPCC report in 2014. So what does this mean? Well, this means that there's only so much that can be accomplished through constructive action, that we have to stop the fossil fuel industry. We have to stop their funders, and we have to stop the politicians that serve them. We have to do the math. Okay. So this brings us to resistance, or incarnational politics. And this is a huge part of our tradition as followers of Jesus. We may wish to avoid it, but it's there. And there's many strategies and tactics, but just to name a few, if we're really to take this to the fossil fuel industry itself, because it hasn't worked for how many decades attempting to bring it through the government. We have to go right to the source. We can offer public testimony if we're privileged, in those spaces that are still afforded to us in the regulatory state. There's lots of different, for every industrial or fossil fuel project, there's points of intervention. If we are privileged enough to have financial investments, we can and should move our money out of fossil fuel and be honest about why we're doing so. But in cases where government oversight continues to fail, we must become the overseers, engaging in civil disobedience, blockades, occupations, saying no to all new fossil fuel extraction or infrastructure projects. All across the country, whether East Coast fracking, mountaintop removal in the Southeast, California fracking, Arctic offshore drilling, Bakken shale oil, Utah oil sands, not to mention the tar sands of Alberta, the Ecuadorian Amazon, or the Niger Delta. Fossil fuel extraction is a global and local environmental violence which must cease. And while we may see something nominal come out of the UN Paris talks later this year, it will not be binding, it will not be just, and it will very likely not be based on science. Politicians won't make this choice for us. We have to do it ourselves. So let's get busy. This is very convenient. A friend of mine, Weston Matthews, I don't have to show a photograph of myself because a friend of mine, Weston Matthews from Richmond, Virginia, was just arrested in a blockade against the fracked gas pipeline, the Atlantic Coast pipeline. So I'm very grateful to him for his ministry, and I think there's various ways, even if we're not participating directly in civil disobedience, to support and to affirm this kind of incarnational politics. So next steps to wrap up, and then I think we'll have about 5 minutes for some final thoughts from all of you. Ground yourself spiritually and in community. There's a great, actually, article which just came through my Facebook newsfeed today. It's the other piece in that link. Maybe Brendan can share it, by an incredible leader in this movement, the Reverend Margaret Bullitt Jonas of Western Massachusetts, who has been a great inspiration to me. And she just wrote a lovely piece specifically on sort of the spirituality of what we're talking about here. And I think it's called Beauty. What is that piece called, Brandon?
Beauty and Advocacy.
Beauty and Advocacy. And so I've been really emphasizing a lot of the sort of the politics of all of this. And, you know, as the liberation movements that have come before have shown us, you know, you cannot separate politics and spiritual practice. So Margaret, I consider her to be probably the best voice out there on this, at least in our church for sure. And there it is. She has a website, and if you're in New England, you should have her out to your parish. So as you ground yourself spiritually and in community, you might find your nearest frontline community and stand there and build resistance. That may be your own community. It may be another community. Work for a just transition. Let's restore the commons and join the fossil fuel resistance. Okay, so I have sort of a closing blessing, but we've got maybe 5 minutes for some final thoughts or reflections, either in the text box or audio. Hopefully this is the beginning. At the end of the presentation, I'll include my email address if you want to stay in touch. And there's also a link to a project I'm involved in called Relocate. I'm part of a group that includes architects, engineers, lawyers that are working with the native village of Kivalina, Alaska, to support a relocation project. And apologies if you're hoping to hear more about that, Kristen, but maybe we can catch up on that later. I know the Lutherans are facing similar situation in villages in coastal Alaska. Okay, Steve Lindsay, what do you think the best method to encourage parishes and other bodies to divest from fossil fuel companies? Well, yeah, so I've put a few links, at least 3 different resources on divestment on the sheet. Okay, thanks, Alan. Bye. But so, Steve, yeah, it's all situational, I guess. I mean, I think there's some very sort of straightforward things that you can bring up, like, for instance, the Rockefeller Foundation has divested from fossil fuel. Every once in a while you see these reports from even places like Goldman Sachs about how oil is not the best investment anymore and the rest of it. So there's these sort of like, you can sort of argue with some of these, financial folks on their own terms and make that claim. But, I'm all about making the ethical claim for why. And I also just, keep in mind and bring up that it's really like a privileged position to be in to have any kind of investments like this at all. And it's ridiculous that, that should be the starting place, and it should be a place of gratitude and what we do with that, not this limited, vision of we just have to make our money grow by any means necessary. Okay. But anyway, just to wrap that up, there's people who spend all day on divestment, and there's at least 3 links I gave you. I don't know where you're located, but Weston, who's down here, did a lot of work on it while he was at Virginia Seminary a couple of years ago. Melissa, there seems to be a lot of tension between focusing locally and globally. Any thoughts on how to bridge on this and how to bridge that divide? Yeah, I mean, I think that this is something that we do well through lots of programs already, and I think that, like I was saying at the beginning, there'll be places where we, just because of the relationships we have, we will be able to be there for each other as sort of climate-related events occur and whatnot. But it just takes time, as you know, and it's deeply rooted in relationship and what time and energy and resources are available, and how much people are able to travel, and whether you're able to get a nucleus of folks together in your own parish or diocese. But I think that, for me, the important thing with global mission is to try and, make sure that exchange and, as you all do in California, goes both ways. And anyway, that's a whole other can of worms. Any other comments here? Okay. Yeah, I mean but I think that's fundamentally the challenge of climate change is, at some level, all we can do is act in our very local sphere of influence, but at another level, we need to develop new ways of acting collectively. And we know some of those already, and we don't know what a lot of those look like yet. And I'm just noticing that it is 5 o'clock here in Portland, which means it's 8 o'clock on the East Coast, and we need to wrap up. So let me just close with this blessing, something that Thomas Merton wrote to a friend in 1966, wrote to, I think, Jim Forrest, who was part of the movement to stop the Vietnam War. Merton, like other great writers like Wendell Berry, encourages us to confront both the necessity and the absurdity of this work, and to lean into God as we seek to join God's creative force of love in the world. Do not depend on the hope of results. When you are doing the sort of work you have taken on, you may have to face the fact that your work will be apparently worthless and even achieve no result at all. if not perhaps results opposite to what you expect. As you get used to this idea, you start more and more to concentrate not on the results, but on the value, the rightness, the truth of the work itself. Amen. As I say, here's my contact information, and sorry we didn't get to have too much audio discussion, but thank you everyone for taking the time to be here, and thanks again to Brendan and Miguel and everyone at the Episcopal Church Foundation for organizing this.
Yes, thank you, Griff. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out this evening. As Griff noted, that his contact information is on the screen. We will also email these slides and his resource sheet to all of you as well. Thank you again, Griff. This was excellent. Please be in touch to continue this important conversation. We're just thrilled that we were able to share this time together this evening. There will be in your inbox an email, either right now or shortly, with a link to a slide. Please just open this up and take a few minutes to provide some feedback so that Griff can receive some feedback. We'll be sharing that with him, and as well for us for these webinars. We are always looking for your input for ways to be able to build upon what we've done and to improve these webinars in future. Thank you again for taking this time out. Again, we'll email this out to all of you. God bless and Godspeed in your ministry.